Mishmash! Kitbash Corner!
Hey, today we got a really special episode. Once again, I'm testing my kitbashing skills against Lizard of Doom. If you're new to the channel, the last time I was on Lizard's channel, I made quite the diorama. Killing Floor and Christmas go pretty hand in hand, but with Easter coming up, I'm making a full-fledged Easter rabot.
Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday.
This little dude was an entirely improv idea, and I'm quite happy with how he turned out. Doing kitbash videos so frequently now has really prepped me for this fella. Of course, like with every miniature I paint and build, I have some sort of regret or something I wish I did differently. But on this guy, it's pretty minimized. The only major restriction I really had on this guy is how much time I gave myself. I really did procrastinate. But for the brief amount of time that I did have to paint him, I squeezed out all the potential I could. But before I show you the process of how I made this guy, don't forget to leave a like, comment, and subscribe for more kitbashing videos like this. It helps so much. So to start things out, I actually used a Battlesec Mini, this being a Marauder. The newer one. I'd never have the heart to snip the classic one. I want this guy's legs. We'll be gluing him to the torso of a Castellan robot. This poor guy's been sitting in a drawer for almost 8 years now unpainted. I'm really happy to finally give him a purpose. I'd assemble one hand, but then I'd snip away at the fingers. As you can see, this giant orc claw from the Death Dread will serve as a rather crucial piece for this guy. I glue this into place rather haphazardly, but I'd alleviate this with time. I'd move it around until I was happy with the position of it, more so on the right side of the hand. Undoubtedly, this is very ugly, and I'd add in more bits to make this a little bit more sightly on the eyes. I then began gluing on these tusks from the same Death Dread, these acting as some pointy bunny ears. And man, are these pointy, I poked my fingers a lot. To secure the ears to the miniature itself, I'm using plenty of sprue goo. Not only is this good for gluing on the parts, but it also gives the effect that they're welded on. This metallic razor bit from the same Death Dread set would be placed in the negative space of the claw arm. I kinda wish I added in some extra parts to really beef up this area. I'm not entirely unhappy with it, but I feel like it could be improved. Thankfully, this is the only really major regret I have on this miniature. In this rather jagged area of the wrist, I'd glue in this cable from the Castellan set. I'm basically just giving myself any excuse to add in more cool cables and tubes. And wires. Speaking of which, I thought it'd be cool to add in more of my circuit board wires that I've used on some other miniatures in the past. At the start of this, I didn't really want to go for a super orky miniature. I thought it would be a little cliche to go for an orc kitbash for a giant robot. But then I quickly realized that's stupid, and people that don't like orcs are nerds and wieners. These wires really do serve to add in a lot. I think they really make the miniature look more lifelike, and you can apply this not only to orcs, but all kinds of robots. For his other arm, I ended up using the leg joint of the robot. To this, I'd glue on some absurdly orky looking weaponry. Any big robot needs some proper firepower. And personally, with how broad the sections are of this robot and the weaponry, I feel like these two pieces actually fit together really nicely. With the Castellan robot's simplistic design, I feel like the cartoony orc bits really do fit well. Maybe it's wishful thinking, but I almost feel like it looks like these two parts are part of the same set. If it's not blatantly obvious, with the limited amount of time that I gave myself to work on this guy, I kinda went haywire with the superglue. I was not patient at all. I'd kinda forced myself to, however, as I really wanted the wires to adhere well with the superglue. Keeping one end glued in for a prolonged period of time really allowed me to bend around the wire without snapping it off. I wanted to work out the kinks in the wire so I could bend it freely. That way I'd have enough slack to make it look like it was actually bending to the forces of gravity. I'd end up using a little bit more wire for the Easter basket too. For the basket itself, I'm using the Alchemite Warforger's Crucible. This bit, in my opinion, really ties the entire miniature together, and you'll see why later on. At first, I'd end up trying to tie on the wires to the bit itself, and this did not work as you can see. I'd end up using a good amount of sprue goo to kind of weld it to the basket itself. Considering this is an orky contraption, this makes sense. I'd also be using plenty of sprue goo to really weld over the entirety of the iconography. I feel like having it remain would make it look a little bit weird. As you can see from the footage, I went through several different renditions of how I wanted the wire to look. I'd hang this from an orc face on the chest on the first go-over, but I had kind of a stroke of brilliance in the middle of the night, and I ended up not getting it on camera. So to kind of explain what I did to alleviate everything, is I ended up taking this orc face and just putting it over the faceplate of the rabbit itself. Makes sense. And for the basket, I ended up using more wire to make it sling around his neck. This way, it can settle nicely on his chest. This, of course, being the core of the miniature. That way, this piece really ties everything together, and you'll see later on, this is what makes the miniature really stand out. So with all the building done, it's time to get painting. For this, I primed the miniature using dark gray, and I sprayed over using a good amount of bold titanium white. Initially, I wanted to go with pink, but with him being a bunny, I felt that white was the way to go. I'd be saving the more bombastic colors for later on. Plus, with this simplistic color scheme, I wanted to go hog wild with the weathering. I want this thing to look like a big, evil behemoth. The metallics I ended up using was dark silver and some bronze. I feel like these colors contrast really nicely with the white, and it effectively gives them kind of a classic astronaut palette. I didn't want to use too much, mostly focusing the bronze on the weapons and some of the computery bits, while using the dark silver mostly on the joints, as well as kind of broadly painting it along the sides of the miniature and not really caring if it scratches up the white. I really want to use this to my advantage. For the wires, I just ended up using some bright contrast colors, this being ball red and some Caran green. Honestly, if I had to go back, I'd probably paint these black. I don't mind how these colors look, but I feel like black would work better for the monochromatic look of the miniature, and I feel like it would make the other colors that I use later on pop out better. Here I'm adding just a little bit of pink on his nose. Ain't he a cutie? To wash the mini, I'm using mud wash from 2 thin coats, and I'm using this all over the entire miniature. I probably should have waited to apply this, as there were some parts of the miniature that weren't painted yet that I'd also use this paint over, but you get the idea. Good example being the carrot rockets, which I'd be painting using Magmadroth Flame and Caran Green. At this point, I'd ended up using a little bit of highlight on the white using my signature scratchy method. This I'm just using some titanium white mixed with ghost gray from Pro Acryl and Vallejo respectively. This is where the guy really comes to life. Sponging on and really scratching on the highlights on any miniature that has painted armor really works well. This really is one of my favorite methods of painting Space Marines, if it's not obvious at this point. With my highlights completed, I think he looks really cold and cruel. He's a little bit more gray at this point, which I think looks really striking with these bold scratches. I then fill these scratches in using some dark brown, doing my best to make them really pop out. It's crazy how effective and simple this method is. It takes a little bit of practice, but once you've got it down, you can make some really sick looking minis. I then decided to use the brown on my palette and I mix a little bit of orange in it. I'd water it down plenty and I'd use this as a nice rusty wash for the legs. It wasn't too bold, but it fits well with the rest of the weathering on the mini and it leaves some more visual interest overall. After my little rust wash dried, I'd go over the entire miniature using my streaky tester dry brush, giving in some good scratches over the miniature using some bright metallics. This not only would highlight the metal really nicely, but it would also add in some really nice dark scratches to the overall miniature that would make him look more like a heavy rust bucket. He looks menacing, cold, cruel, and unrelenting, especially after filling in the eyes using some Black Legion. Totally soulless. The metallic dry brushing would also do a good favor in terms of the more muted elements of the miniature and make them a little bit more interesting to look at. Going back to the Crucible or the Easter basket, I ended up using a little bit more of the dark silver, and I'd go over this using some snakebite leather. I figured using a metallic color like this would make it more akin to a wicker basket, also while simultaneously making this look like a huge hefty piece of metal. And speaking of the basket, it's time to paint the Easter eggs. For this, I have a few marine heads, which I'll be coloring with the same usual pastel colors we associate with Easter. You can already see where I'm going with this, right? Once these colors dried, I began freehanding some simplistic Easter egg-like designs onto each of them using some complementary colors. I try to make each of them rather unique, as I felt going hog wild with the bright colors would contrast really nicely with the dull colors we have for the metal behemoth. I got quite experimental with this, using some really bright golds and adding in just a little bit of dusting of the metallic flakes. Honestly, it was just really fun to make up these designs on the fly. Truthfully, I wanted to do more, but with the amount of time that I had and the procrastination, 3 would have to do. These are colors I don't typically paint, so it was a lot of fun to really experiment. I especially like how this pink one looks. Kinda makes me want to paint Emperor's Children. Once I was happy with each of them, I glued a couple to the basket, letting them sit nicely atop of one another. The last one would hide in the foliage on the base. I'm actually kinda glad that I only had to do 3. I feel like doing any more would kinda make this base look busy. I should also disclose that Lizard's rules only permit a 32mm base for the competition. I took full advantage of the limited space I had with some static grass, shrubs, and little flower bushes. To contrast with this cutesy little patch of fairy tale land, I added in a healthy amount of blood. Mostly to the claw and the undersides of the head. I didn't want to do too much on the heads themselves, as I didn't want to obscure any of the details I painted on. To finish this guy off, I added a little bit of Nihilok oxide to the basket and all the copper areas. And I'd call this robotic nightmare complete. And man, despite my regrets of some of the building process, this dude looks great. I am really happy with him, and he was a lot of fun to make. The mix of bits really did it for me, especially mixing in some Battletech bits with Warhammer stuff. These little competitions really allow me to spread my wings in terms of kit bashing. I like to keep my Warhammer kit bashes accessible to mostly Warhammer bits for the most part, but for these kinds of things I give myself no rules. Overall, this is an incredibly fun competition to be a part of, and I really look forward to the next one. I'm regretful that I wasn't part of the Valentine's Day one, it just didn't work out time-wise. But I just want to give a huge thanks to Lizard of Doom for bringing me on again. Really appreciate it if you guys checked out his channel, he's got some really good stuff, and check out the video that I'm in. Actually 2 of them now. And don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe on this one first. I would really appreciate it. But I'll quit flapping my beak for now, and I'll leave you with a mishmash kit bash, and paint some fantastic miniatures. And you're gonna. I promise. See ya!